Bob, it's wonderful to meet you, sir. Thank you for taking a minute out for the show.
Happy to be here.
So let's begin our journey into your good work by asking you this. 5 years ago, the pandemic was roaring. I know we all want to forget it, but it was such a big deal, threw so many things into the unknown. How did you get through it, and how has it reverberated and affected the way that you do work and live now?
I spend a good deal of time traveling from place to place conducting sessions. And so come March 2020, everything turned upside down because all of a sudden I couldn't go out and do lives, or not live, but in-person sessions. And so we went out and bought all kinds of equipment and cameras and lights and so on, and everything became virtual. And we all kind of struggled to kind of adjust the content to looking at a bunch of thumbnails on a screen.
Yeah.
So that was part of it. And of course, things kind of stopped for us for a period of time because conducting seminars is not something that people need. They're not desperate. It's not like buying eggs.
Yeah.
So we had to adjust in that sense. My wife was at that time was a dean at a university, and so all of a sudden everything stopped. Everybody went home. They all learned how to work remote. But humans are resilient if you give them the opportunity, and we learn to adjust.
Yeah, we certainly did. So you spent decades as a business owner. Now you speak and you're an author. There's so much that goes in to who you are. But let's boil it down to exactly what you do now in 2025. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of grade schoolers, sixth graders. It's career day. The kid in the back of the room is curious, and he's like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer him?
What I say to them is I help people recapture their time and their energy and their focus by making better decisions, in a nutshell.
How did you do that? How did you get to a point where you figured that out as a business owner?
Through observation, a part of what I've done over 30 years is interview about 100 business owners and business executives and so on a year in preparation for the work that I do and the books that I write and so on. And after a while, when you talk to really smart people, you begin to see patterns of what they do and what they don't do. And so what I say to a lot of people is if you want to make better decisions, if you want to conserve time, ask yourself what the people who you see, who you admire are doing, and ask yourself if you're doing that stuff. And also, what are they not doing that you shouldn't be doing? Because life's full of temptations and we get sucked into social media and we get sucked into all kinds of other things. These people don't. They're much better at making decisions and having the self-discipline to get things done in a shorter period of time with less energy.
So did you read the book by Studs Terkel, Working, about all of the interviews that he did?
A long time ago, yes.
I
Yeah.
was just thinking about that, kind of
Yeah.
having that cross section, because there's nothing better to figure out what's going on with the feet on the ground than to talk to people and to really observe what's going on.
That's very true. And it's a lot of it, in addition to just asking them, if you ask somebody what makes you a good decision maker, they don't necessarily tell you
Yeah.
because they don't think about that. It's just part of their ethos. But if you watch them and so what I do is I look at I look at the nuances. An example of that would be if you look at a good leader doesn't speak a whole heck of a lot in a meeting. That person kind of summarizes what happens at the end, but they want the input of everybody else. And they can watch that behavior and they can tell who's in charge and who has the best ideas and so on. Rather than saying, because if they start talking first, they're programming everybody around them who's in the meeting that, oh, that's what the leader wants to hear. And so that's what I'm going to tell them.
I have a jazz radio show, and throughout the years, when I talk about Miles Davis, I finally got to a point where I understand what his essence was. The
Mhm.
greatest skill that he had was being a listener. They all talk about that.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, he would talk, and of course, he had that gravelly, that very signature approach. But he would listen to everything, and he was very impeccable with that. And I think that's kind of emblematic of leadership. With people being in that position of just listening to what's going on and taking it in. And maybe that's just age and wisdom. I think sometimes we get to a point where we just need to sit back and not talk and just take it all in.
I think that's very true. I think there are some old souls out there. I've met some young people who have that wisdom. A lot of times it comes from parenting. It comes from observing the people around them and so on. But yeah, I think with age, people learn to, not all people, but the people who make a difference have learned to listen.
With business leaders too, there's so much that's going on. I think sometimes it's almost getting sucked into a whirlpool. Like it happens so fast, you get in the middle of it. There's so many moving parts the people like you need to come in there and be like, all right, look, I'm coming from this perspective. I'm coming from a macro because I think sometimes they're inside the peanut butter jar and they can't see the label. They don't know what's going on, right?
That's very true. I think that one of the things that leaders learn over a period of time is the more responsibility you have, the less you actually do, the more you guide. So the individual on the front line has a set of tasks. The further up the food chain they go, the less they actually commit to tasks and complete tasks, and instead they have conversations. They think. They just go out for a walk sometimes because they've got to think through what they need to do. And so the people who have struggled with that, in my experience, are the individuals who are not comfortable not doing something because they're used to doing something. And so they fill up their time with tasks and things that they shouldn't be doing. They should be delegating those and then being the guide, if you will.
So let's go back for a second here, and I want to ask you this: when you were in the sixth grade, what was your dream job? What did you want to grow up and become?
Not a clue. I'm one of those insatiably curious people, and so on any given day or any given week, I might be interested in doing a different thing. And I'm like many people, as I've conducted seminars, one of the things that I have asked people, I've said, raise your hand if you can tell me exactly why you chose what you're in. And usually about 1 in 100 people will raise their hand and everybody else will laugh because in many cases we jump into something out of necessity. We need to make money, or we have a friend who says, hey, this is a good thing, you should work here, and we stick with it. And if we begin to thrive, all of a sudden 5, 10 years down the road we think, holy smokes, I'm making a career out of this. How did that happen? There are not a lot of people who just go out with a specific direction. There may be some who say, well, I want to be an accountant because I'm good at math, or my daughter is a veterinary student, a fourth year veterinary student. She's always been a science geek, so whatever she's doing, she's going to be in science. But from a specific occupation, I think a lot of people just kind of default that way, and part of it is exploration. It goes back to career counseling. Do you like people, data, things? Okay, you like people. Okay, what kind of people do you want to deal with? And that's some of my background is career counseling and helping people understand that, because too often others influence us in ways. Well, I'll tell you my personal example. My father was in the banking business, but he always wanted to be a shop teacher. So I ended up being a shop teacher for about 4 years, went through school, taught shop and so on, said, this is not me, and got out of it and went in a different direction. And of course, I was living his dream for 4 years. So, but there's people out there who do that. There's thousands of them who get into that situation. And then some of us change and some of us just stay with it, whether we like it or not or whatever.
When I did career day in the late 80s, so I'm 52, I remember at that point they said there's a good chance that everyone in that room was going to change careers 5 to 10 times. And we're all just like, whoa, 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 what? That just
Yeah.
seems like a high number. But that's actually probably low now, with the way things are happening. I think that's just kind of commonplace because there used to be that notion 20 years before you just pick a profession and you stick with it. Like I remember my dad was in sales. He did sales his
Hmm.
whole life, and that's what he's stuck in. My mom worked in customer service, and that's what she's stuck in. And it was just like that was kind of the notion. You pick where you're going, you stay in it. So when we heard that, we're like, that kind of shattered the glass ceiling, so to speak.
Well, I think it's a combination of things. We have learned over time. The baby boomers kind of stayed with it. The whistle blew, you go to work. The whistle blows, you go home. It's kind of like Fred Flintstone.
Yeah.
That's to some degree what we were conditioned to do, but it has changed for a couple of reasons. Number one, industries have changed. Literally industries have gone away, so it's not the option there anymore. Technology has had a tremendous influence on, well, my job doesn't exist anymore because it's been taken over by fill in the blank.
Yeah.
So we don't have that same sense. There are people out there who do something. Professionals, the accountants and the physicians and those types of people tend to get into something and stay there, but that's partially because they've got it's a profession that they can identify, they work with, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to administrative services, logistics, that type of thing, most people don't stay in one spot for too long.
Yeah. So take me back to your childhood. Where were you born and raised? What were these foundational seeds and elements that were born into you? and evolved into who you became as a business leader and now somebody that's helping businesses get to a better place. How did this happen?
I grew up in New Jersey. In fact, I grew up across the street from John Travolta, which is one of my claims to fame. Haha.
Wow.
We just happened to live in the same, we lived across the street from each other. He was a goof back then, and he's not as much of a goof now, but I have fond memories of that. And Went to school in New Jersey, got the industrial arts degree, taught shop. And then from there, I had always been interested in higher education. So I ended up in higher education, primarily in career counseling. I ran residence halls for a couple of years and that type of thing. And I got to a point where I was doing a lot of work with the employers, and I discovered that the employers didn't have any better process for hiring the students in my under my purview, if you will, than the students had getting the jobs. And so I jumped ship. This was in 1988. I wrote a book called Smart Hiring to teach employers how to do a better job of hiring. Because even now, 35 years later, sad to say, most employers suck at hiring. They don't get it, and they shoehorn the selection process in, and then they get frustrated or upset when the person they hoped that applicant would be on the job is not, for any one of a variety of reasons.
So my shop teacher lived two houses from me when I was in high school,
Okay.
and he had a nice house, and I remember talking to him, and it was like a passion project. So when you
Mhm.
said this, it's funny how I think about like the shop teachers that I've known, it's almost kind of like a side hustle, so to speak. Like there's other things they're good at, but they want to do this. It's like the thing that really gets them going. So it's interesting how you mentioned that you were in there for a little bit and your dad wanted to be in there. So there must be
You
something
know,
in that DNA line.
there's a passion there, Joe. I'll give you an example. I just sold my last rental property. I've managed on as a side hustle, as they say. I've owned and managed rental properties, and up until a couple of years ago when things changed, it's been fun. I can do all kinds of really cool stuff in terms of electricity and plumbing and so on and so forth that I learned early on that I was able to leverage in that situation. And I think a lot of shop teachers are that same way. They enjoy the opportunity, and it's kind of interesting now that we're watching shop classes come back into schools where we got rid of them, which
Yeah.
was really kind of sad. And that's part of the reason why we now spend $100 just to have the plumber walk across the threshold when something's wrong, because
Yeah.
there's not enough tradespeople.
Yeah.
And now people are beginning to discover, wow, I can go to school for 4 years and come out $30,000 in debt and find a job in an office, or I can learn a trade and work for 4 years, become a journeyman, and make $80,000 a year and have no debt. Hmm, which would you do? And that's not across the board, but obviously that whole process is beginning to change, and I'm in favor of that. This Old House series does a great job of promoting that. What they've been doing over the past 10 years in that sense is to me a great contribution, because we need those people.
It's interesting you bring up employers having difficulty hiring the right people because I've seen that historically through my life as a worker. I'm in the IT industry, and I remember when I got hired, my boss at the time, I was in a room full of people. There was administrators and principals and teachers, and he was right across the room, and he said, "I have two criteria. I mean, above and beyond degrees and certifications and all of these things." And he was the best boss I ever had. He boiled it down to this: I want someone that has a good attitude and a willingness to learn. That was it.
Yeah,
Now, his gut instinct was going to go off everything else that I did: qualifications, years of experience, all of those things, knowing COBOL, knowing MCSE, all of these things. But that was the cornerstone. So, my question to you is one of your jobs getting in there and allowing these CEOs and these business leaders to trust their gut more when they get to those moments?
well, yes, absolutely. One of the things that I say to employers all the time is, I don't care what an applicant knows. I want to know how an applicant thinks. Because you come out with a degree, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a good thinker, you're a good decision maker. What
Yeah.
that means is you have a body of content that you've been able to pass tests on. Now, that's going to be helpful in a supplemental way, but the reality is, any job that you go into, they're going to have to teach you their processes, how they work, what their workflow is, what their communication is. You have to get used to their culture and so on and so forth. And the individuals who thrive are the individuals who are able to work their way through that. So the target that one of the things that I teach employers all the time is put simulations together. If you've got somebody who's going to be dealing with a particular type of situation, put a simulation together and put them through that simulation and see how they deal. Now, that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to make the right decisions in the simulation. You want to see how they approach them. You want to see what questions they ask. You want to see how they deal with the difficulty. You want to see what happens when they become overwhelmed. How do they handle that? Those types of things. Now, that takes more effort than the average employer, unfortunately, is willing to invest.
Yeah.
And yet, at the same time, geez, even for a frontline 22-year-old fresh out of college kid, you might be spending $80,000 just the first year to employ that individual. So you're making an $80,000 decision.
Yeah.
How many meetings do you have before you buy an $80,000 machine, for instance? So it's kind of perverse in the way that people shoehorn the selection process into everything else rather than really focusing on it because you've got to live with that individual for how many years?
Yeah. So when you look at the world of business, it's kind of like sports. There's this kind of rags to riches rise, and we look at all of the aspects of the business. Of all of the business leaders that exist on the planet right now, who do you admire top down that does it right from the way they project and lead to their employees to the branding, all of those things? Is there anybody that you look up to and emulate?
At the top of the list probably would be Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan.
Yeah,
A couple of reasons. One, he's been there for a long time, which means that if you're the CEO for 20 years, which he has been, you must know what you're doing, and people believe in you in
yeah,
that sense. Now, that doesn't mean that he's not a good politician and makes choices sometimes that people don't like, and so on. But one of the things that he has said that's really impressed me is he's a very good delegator. He said, look, if I give you the authority, go out and make the decision. Now, if there's an issue and something blows up, yeah, we'll have a conversation about it. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to fire you or that I'm going to discipline you. That simply means you made a bad decision. We look at it and we figure out what went wrong so we don't do it again.
yeah.
But he has about 7 direct reports from what I've seen him say for the different divisions or the different parts of the business. So, that's one of the things that bedevils an awful lot of leaders is they try to be all things to all people. One of the other things I say to leaders all the time is recognize that even offhanded comments can have a tremendous impact. I met a CEO who said, "Where are the blueberry donut? Where are the blueberry muffins?" I didn't. There's no blueberry. He said, "For the next 6 months, all I got was blueberry muffins at every staff meeting." Like, stop this.
Yeah.
But people take you seriously sometimes.
I think one thing I feel bad for CEOs sometimes because everybody has to play this game, the nice game. They don't get
Mhm.
humanized. And I think sometimes the CEOs, as high up as they are, and we all think like with the athletes, you get paid enough, you can deal with it. But I think at the end of the day, even with the worker to the CEO, you want to feel like you're a human being, that you're a part of the process, and that people aren't feigning this whole like nice thing because they want to be in your good graces. Do you ever find that with CEOs that they just want to be kind of on? I mean, because I, at the end of the day, it has to get exhausting to have everybody play a game in front of you.
I think the good CEOs call people out. They do it in a diplomatic way,
Yeah,
but as I said at the top of the podcast here, they're good listeners, and so they let people talk. Now, some people sink themselves in the process, but in other cases, they watch who the good thinkers are, and those are the people they're attracted to. So that's one part of it. A second part of it is exposure. It is, as Peters and Waterman used to talk about, what, 20, 30 years ago now, management by walking around. Jack Welch, as much as he is perceived as a mercurial CEO by many people, the fact that Jack would go down to the to the plant floor and just talk to people in his shirt sleeves and say, "What do you think?"
yeah,
And those who had the temerity to say, "Jack, this is wrong. We should be doing it this way," and so on. Well, that's a good thing. So managers who are able to reach out and comfortably touch those people, that's an important part of it. I'm trying to think of Jeffrey's going to come to my name. He wrote a book. He was the dean of the business school at Harvard. The book was called The Mind of the CEO. Trying to remember it. Anyway, what he said in interviewing, this was basically an interview of about 50 CEOs for about 2 hours each. But he says in the foreword of the book, one of the things that struck me was that at one point or another, in every single one of these, every single CEO said, kind of like, can you believe this? I'm in charge of like 65,000 people. How did that happen?
Yeah.
And so there was a sense of wonder, a sense of fascination with that type of thing. CEOs are people, they go home to their families. They do the stuff. They just do it differently.
Yeah.
And they have been able to rise because of a variety of factors, communication being one of those most important things, and also vision.
Yeah.
Just I know where we're going and follow me.
Jeffrey Garten, is that his name?
Jeffrey Garden. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Joe. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. In this pursuit of being the best you can be all around, how essential was it for you to find balance between family, your own soul, and your business, all of these things that you did? Is that a key ingredient to all of this, to being healthy and successful in business?
I think it's complicated because you go through phases and seasons of life. And so when you're young, you throw yourself into it. I've always been, my wife and I have been married 35 years, and absolutely comes first, the family and so on. But that said, I also work long hours, and now I don't have to. I'm blessed with the resources and so on and so forth. But I think it comes in seasons. If you throw everything you've got into it to the exclusion of family and friends and balance, well, you may have a lot of money, but what else do you have?
Yeah.
But you do have to work hard and you have to work smart and you have to develop the communication skills and the relationships that make that work.
So, Bob, let's say you walk into a room of everybody that you've worked with in a business sense throughout all these years, and you swim through that sea of people and go to a podium, and you can tell that room one fun thing, one fun story, something that would humanize you in a different way to them. What would you tell that room of people?
I have kind of a mantra called "I love an adventure," because when you approach challenges, whatever those challenges are, it's about mindset. It's how you approach whatever is in front of you. And my wife and I went to Italy about, I don't know, 10 years ago now. And we went to a place called Bagneregio, which is in the hill country of Tuscany. And we had a great time, but we missed the last bus back to Orvieto where we were staying. So it's March. It's the sun's going down. We don't speak any Italian. The people in this little town off the beaten path don't speak any English, and we're stuck. And we don't have any. Our bags are in Orvieto, and so on and so forth. And I just started saying, "Okay, I love an adventure." And we thought, "Okay, what are we going to do here?" And finally, we said, "Okay, well, let's see. Maybe the police." So we went down to the Carabinieri, which is the federal police. They literally threw us out of the office and said, "We can't help you. Get out of here." So then we went up to the grocery store and they just kind of shrugged their shoulders because they couldn't speak any English. So we said, okay, well, the pharmacy. So we went to the pharmacy and the pharmacist spoke enough English so she understood our problem, but she couldn't help us. But she said, there's a travel agency across the square. So we walked across the square. The sun is going down. The lights are coming on. Everybody's going home. And just as we got there, they were shutting up. But we said to them, this is our problem. What do we do? And they said, well, there's a bed and breakfast about 3 or 4 blocks up. Go up there, knock on that door. Maybe that woman has some place for you to stay. So, you walk up there and you have that trepidation. You're bargaining with God about, oh, please let this happen. And I knocked on the door, and this woman opens the door, and I tried to explain in my 10 words of Italian what was going on. And in just the King's English, she said, oh, please come in. And she took care of us. Her husband called the hotel in Orvieto to make sure the baggage wasn't thrown away. And on top of that, she introduced us to a couple that were staying with her from Seattle. And so she put the four of us together and sent us down to this wonderful Italian restaurant, and we had a 3 hour dinner. So you just don't
Yeah.
know. And it's kind of like you can approach challenges with oh no, what's going to go wrong? Or you can approach it with, I love an adventure.
I mean, you could even throw out the Travolta story too. That would be a good one.
Yeah, well, yeah. I've never gone back to approach John because I've thought to myself, he wouldn't remember me. Maybe he
Yeah.
remembers me, but I don't play on that stuff.
Yeah, no, I dig it. Yeah. So, I went to Italy. I had a pen pal in high school and I went to Florence, south of Florence. So one day I took the train to Rome and I was so excited. I got there probably mid-afternoon. I went to the Colosseum, went to the Forum, did all this stuff, and I was staying by the Vatican and I got lost on the way home. And I kind of had a scenario like that. And I was in a shady area. The Italian was really splotchy. And I remember I don't know how I did it, but I finally figured my way back before GPS and all these things we have. And I
Sure.
remember I literally kissed the building that I was in. I was like, I can't believe I'm back. So it's weird when you're in a foreign country and you don't know the language, but at the same time, I kept thinking it's going to be okay. One way or another, I'm
Yeah.
going to hobble my way back home and I'll find out. And I did. So, of all of these things that you've done and accomplished and evolved into in your life, what are you the proudest of?
My kids and my marriage,
Yeah, yeah,
you know, the rest of it's ancillary. The rest of it's nice and I contributed in this particular way, but when I pass on, they're going to remember me as a hopefully as a good husband and a good father.
yeah. So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, Bob. Family, friends, clients, colleagues, everyone that you've worked with and known, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I'm an accomplished professional who's been able to share a lot of good insights with a variety of different people, and that has helped lift them up and help their businesses. But I also think hopefully I've been an inspiration to my kids and been an inspiration to people around me just by the values that I have and the behaviors that I display.
I got to know, of all the travels and all the places you've been to on the planet, what was one of the most unexpectedly magical places that you've traveled to?
Wow. Um, Kodiak Island, Alaska would come to mind. I
Okay.
love Kodiak.
Yeah.
I love Alaska. I've gone up there any number of times for business, but I always take some time to hike and climb and things like that. So Kodiak comes to mind as one of my top. Interestingly enough, Mexico City, just because the culture is so interesting down there,
Yeah.
and yet at the same time, it's a you know you got to be careful.
It's a Wild West kind of
It's
thing.
when there are people with automatic weapons standing outside the bank the bank entrances, and when there's literally a machine gun nest at the front of the police station, you say to yourself, I'm in a different place.
Uh-huh. I remember I was stuck in Europe on 9/11. I was in the back of a
Ooh,
water taxi in Venice, and I remember coming home and the French Foreign Legion were trolling around all of the airports, and that was like, wow, boots
yeah.
up to the knees, full, like we aren't used to that here. It was
No,
wild.
no, that's very true. That's
Yeah,
very true. We live in a very safe place in spite of all of the negative news we see on the media.
totally. Yeah, yeah, I agree. I totally agree. So if anyone wants to reach out, they want to learn more, hire you, any other good business, have questions, how do they do that?
The website is commonsenseenterprises.net, and I am simply Bob W. at commonsenseenterprises.net.
Okay.
And, reach out, let's start a relationship, see if we can work together or if there's an interest.
Absolutely. Bob, this has been wonderful. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your story. Best of luck with everything.
Same to you, Joe.
Thank you. Hello, friends. Joe Dimino here. I just wanted to let you know that after 30 years or so, I have finally released my first book of poetry through the mighty Spartan Press here in Kansas City, Missouri. As the creator and host of both Neon Jazz Radio and the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino podcast, along with being a visual artist, I'm ready to embark on a new adventure and want you to be a part of it. You can get a copy online via Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and actually on the streets in Kansas City at the great Prospero's bookstore off 39th Street. You can also visit joedimino.com for links to the book, to more poetry, and everything in my world, including paintings. Thanks for all of the love and support over the years, and please dig the words.